Hey everyone. I am super excited to have Dominic back presenting to our class. Dominic has presented to previous sections of the course, which I may reference, but it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I first met Dominic when we worked together at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, and I really liked your the Corner Store series. Is that a corner store? Is that technically what that place is?
Sure. It was on a corner.
Deli, corner store.
Deli, corner store. Yeah. I
Yeah.
always reference it as a deli, but it was on a corner, so corner store.
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, I love that work, and then I kind of lost track, and then I saw your work pop up on Instagram not so long ago, and it just blew me away. I love like the layers and layers, and I don't want to give things away, but that kind of like sculptural and tactile approach to photography just really excites me personally, and I love seeing it like out in the world. So yeah, I'm happy to have you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Cool. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, my name's Dominique, and I will share my screen so you guys can have some visuals to this. Um, let's go. Can you guys see that? Looks great. Perfect.
Very good.
My name's Dominique Munoz. And here's all of my information, to Instagram, email, and website. And I'll repeat it again at the end so you guys can see it as well. Um, yeah. So I'm originally from Falls Church, Virginia. I got my bachelor's fine arts in photo and film at VCU Arts in 2015. And my MFA in studio art at UNC Chapel Hill in 2025. So a little bit of a time gap between the two. Which really helped, I think, change how I thought about photography and making images. So this is the series that Dana was referencing of the deli, the corner store. It's called Nick's Deli. I was a cashier with them for 3 years, pretty much throughout my undergrad time, and I worked there 3 days a week. And one day I had the assignment in my darkroom class where I had to shoot a roll of film the following day, and then the next class period I had to bring in that roll of film and develop it. But in between those days, I had to work all day, and shooting on film really requires a lot of light, and you can't just like photograph at night, and it just would look bad. So I asked my bosses if I could bring my camera to work, and that really evolved into this 3 year long documentary project where I captured our relationships and my relationship to the deli and their relationships to the space and kind of the community. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go through a bit. This was my cash register on the left, as you can see, and I was really interested in the way the light raked in the space. Um, there was like a set of like windows in the front that really like highlighted the front of the store, and that's also where our break table was. So having the coworkers, my boss, his name is Coach. He's right there on the right. That was one of the owners. They would always sit there, have their coffee, banter, have their regulars come in and talk to them. But I just really was interested in documenting this relationship I had to them, and thinking a lot about like Greek culture, Greek art history. So I was thinking about like columns and what items referenced or had similar kind of like aesthetics. So like our coffee cups every morning really looked like a column after I photographed them and looked at them under certain lighting conditions, and I thought those like moments were really interesting. And then I also saw the deli workers themselves resembling warriors, and the kind of the little scars that they would wear, their own uniforms, the apron, the shields. Even though they weren't direct warriors, to me they kind of resembled this. Yeah, they took on that archetype. So I was also doing a lot of like location lighting stuff where I would like pull them out of the deli, use my own like strobes and like light them, and really trying to like focus on torso, thinking again about back to Greek statues. And this is the way I installed the show. So in the back, you can see some of my larger images mounted, and then someone's listening to it with a headphone. There was an audio piece behind there where my boss was describing this word philotimo, which is essentially the binding undercurrent that unites humanity together. It's a Greek word, kind of with no real direct translation, but that kind of became the through line throughout this whole body of work. On the left, you'll see two people looking through these images, and those were all actually phone images that I took. And so I decided to like I use my phone a lot as like as a sketching tool. If I see something, I'm just like, ooh, and I just will randomly capture them. And then, so I wanted a place for them to exist. And I once had someone tell me I can only pick one camera, like a digital camera, a film camera, or a phone camera. And I really rebelled against that because I was like, I think it's just kind of about what tool I have access to in that moment is what really, and that's like kind of what, like, for me, what photo is about, just like capturing the thing with like with the tool that I have in that moment. And not necessarily having like the largest lens or like the biggest and baddest camera at that moment. Um, and I allowed that to become an intimate moment where people could like flick through and find little small moments that they enjoyed themselves. And it also resembled a way that someone would like find and shuffle things in the store. So I kind of wanted to recreate that experience. And then on the right side here, you'll see this brown paper bag filled with black beans, and inside was a speaker that had laughter erupting out of it. So I collected different laughter from people in the store, customers, my coworkers, and I just compile them together. And so you walk up and it's a bag of laughing beans. Um, yeah, so that was my thesis for undergrad. And that project really led me into um, this residency with a construction company called Clark Construction. Their parent company is called 1906 Group, but they manage Clark Construction, which is a huge construction company nationwide in the United States. And I was their inaugural photographer in residence, and they really enjoyed the way I documented my coworkers at the deli, and they kind of wanted me to kind of take that same mindset and apply it to construction sites and their own sites. So for a year and a half, I traveled around the country photographing the art of building. And that was kind of my assignment. It was photograph the art of building, interpret that how you please, and go for it. And so became really mesmerized by colors and patterns of the uniforms and also just really honoring each individual. Um, so I'll go through some of that work. This was a concrete pour over in Pike and Rose in Maryland. So I loved watching like kind of like I was like really like on the ground as they're like actively like pouring and doing all this work, which is really fun. I learned a lot about construction. This was on the left, you'll see San Francisco. This was on the Salesforce Tower, which there they use a lot more like steel work. And on the right, you'll see Washington, D.C. This was what's it called now? The Anthem is now what it's called. It's a concert venue. So it was really fun to be in there before it was an active concert venue. And now I've like gone multiple times to see concerts at that space. Of
Dominic,
course,
can
I
I?
love.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. I hop in and ask a question. Is that all right?
yeah, of course.
How do you? This is like maybe a basic question, but how do you decide whether you're gonna push something into black and white or leave it color?
Yeah, it's a hard thing. So all of this was digital work. And so I guess two things for this specific work. My boss at one point was like, "Can you photograph things in black and white?" And I was like, "Sure, okay." I love color, so I usually lean more towards the color imagery. But sometimes the black and white actually really enhances and it isolates certain like aspects of the composition. So on the left, you'll see like the patterned windows in the background. Like there was not really like a great color to that. Maybe it was like a mixture of weird colors. And so flipping this in black and white really allowed the eye to get drawn and emphasize the individual worker. Um, and then I also just love sometimes like that, like the contrast that happens between the two and that like gradient of grays that occur. Um,
Yeah,
but it kind of
cool.
sometimes is in the moment decision.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. This was in a quarry in Atlanta, Georgia, where the job site had to expand the clean water reservoir for like the emergency water reservoir for Atlanta, where originally it was 5 days, and their job was to expand to 35 days. So Clark was hired to do this job, and they drained a quarry which has been used in like Hunger Games, Stranger Things, Fast and Furious, other movies. So when they actually drained the quarry, they found one of the doors from Fast and Furious, which is like one of my favorite fun facts of the job. Um, but this was I took like a Loki train like in the tunnel, and this was like me exploring the tunnels that they had like excavated out and like built to like hold all this water reservoir. Again, this is a little bit of a nod back to the deli where I was thinking about like the downtimes and the breaks and the moments where the employees actually kind of sit and relax and aren't working. And I was really fascinated by the way workers on construction sites had to constantly rebuild this space for themselves. Like every time they erected something, the buildings, they like had to move this space. And so they would like just take simple like nails and like wood platforms to create their own break rooms or to hang their items. So I always really gravitated towards these break room spaces. This was in Seattle, Washington, when I think they were expanding the metro system out there. I really like the man versus machine or the collaboration of the two. And this was one of my favorite moments of the job. At Salesforce Tower again in San Francisco. This was at that time the tallest building to the west of the Mississippi. I believe it was like 70 or 60 something stories in the air, but the steel workers asked if I wanted to get in a harness and climb up with them as they locked in the remaining two beams of the tower. So they were actually like crowning out the top of Salesforce Tower. And so this is me up there photographing that moment where the last two beams are coming in. Um, and this is like a behind the scenes photo of me, little guy right there with the high vis vest, terrified for my life. I'm scared of heights.
It's so terrifying. It's so
And it's windy in
terrifying.
San Francisco too, so the building's just kind of like teetering a little bit. I'm holding on with one hand to this ladder as I'm like photographing with another hand. And I was up there for like an hour until they told me I had to get down because the workers were like right by my feet at one point, like locking in the beams, and they were like, technically this is unsafe for you, so you should probably get down. But it was one of the highlights of my time there. I felt like there was not going to be any opportunity again to be on the top, to be like in the sky like that. And I had to kind of conquer my fear of heights to achieve that image. But it's like one of the most memorable things I've done with them. This was at the end of my residency with them. I did a solo show at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. So I got to curate and like work with their curator on site to lay out, build this exhibition. And with for that, I also made these laser engraving images because I really liked these images that I had made, but the safety inspector for Clark had deemed them like unsafe because he didn't see certain things in them. Like he was like, well, I don't see them wearing a high vis vest or something like that. And so by making them into these like laser engravings where like a lot of detail could be like removed or like context, they were fine to be used in this way. And it was nice. It was like an experiment for me. I've never had done laser engraving before, and I really wanted to kind of think about the material of like wood and the material of the construction sites and imprint these images back into like that kind of surface. Um, and then that case here, you can see my hard hat, which has all my safety inspect orientation stickers. So like every time I went to a job site, I had to be oriented by to each job site so I could safely walk around on my own. So it was kind of like my passport to be on each construction site. Um, this whole exhibition was framed by this company called Framebridge, and they shortly after this I left the residency and they were looking for a photographer, in-house photographer, and so I became their in-house photographer for 3 years. I switched it. This was a like it was like a whole turn of the way I was photographing because this moved me into more of like a commercial route of photographing, but it allowed me to understand kind of that aspect and that world of commercial photography and being on set, working with like art directors and creative directors and having multiple components that go into like a photo shoot and it wasn't just like my sole decision. So it was a really huge learning opportunity for me, and I got to develop the visual brand identity for the company as they like rebranded this and as they rolled out into retail stores. So I'm just gonna kind of quickly cycle through this work, but all of the work that I did with them was done with artificial lighting, and so I love natural light. I love and I love like the way like light kind of like drags into spaces and just like beams into. So I was my goal while working with them was trying to figure out how do I recreate that and make it look natural. Um, and I felt like I did a pretty good job. So this is kind of some of that work. Having to work with models also was different versus then using documentary type of images. Like I had to like really like stage all of these things. And it was like a very different way of thinking about images because I always thought true images are like made through this like documentary approach. But as I'll talk about in a little bit, I thought that that was kind of a not say wrong, but it just was like it opened me up. I got a lot of free frames from this job. That was great. I framed a lot of my work, which was nice. Um, After this,
That's
this
such a
was
good perk.
oh my gosh, yeah, you don't understand. My mom, after one point, my dad was like, "No more frames. I don't want to put no more frames in our house." And I was like, "Gotcha." Um, After this was so I was working with them during the pandemic as well. So came come 2021, I was exhausted. I was the only in-house photographer. So I was doing a lot of this work also on my own after a while because we had to be isolated. And so my creative directors and art directors were working remotely and they would just kind of like Slack message me like, "Can you adjust this? Can you like do this?" And after a while that became annoying to as a way to work and I really needed help and they weren't at a place to like offer me that help. So
Wait,
I decided
Dominic, we
to
had a
quit. Oh,
sorry,
yeah.
we had a question in the chat. Sarah Hines wants to know: are these artificial lighting, like especially the one on the left?
Oh yeah, yeah. All this. So there's like some. It's a mixture of like some sunlight coming in, but most of it is like I'm emphasizing it with artificial lighting, and mixing a little bit of it. Like the one here, all done artificial light. Like there's no actual
These are just
sunlight pouring in. I just like
big
am like setting
strobes.
strobes outside and
Nice.
like changing the color temperature. So it's like because I had to be so technical, I had to like also I got to like learn how manipulating color temperature could really then also emphasize or putting gels or filters like over the lights could really like trick the human eye into thinking this is natural light. Um, but yeah, so I got really tired of this way of working. It was like fun and I learned a lot. Um, but I quit. I moved to Wyoming because my partner at the time was getting his MFA in creative writing, and I decided to look through my own images of what I had taken like outside of work and things I was just kind of like mundanely photographing around either my house, my grandma's house, my parents' house, um, and just tried to like look over that and decided I wanted to go to grad school. And so I applied to grad school and I got in and I started to try to understand a new way of that I wanted to like work. So I started mixing some of those techniques of artificial lighting and natural lighting into my process. And so in the image on the left, is the first snowfall of, I think this was 2021, in my grandma's neighborhood. And I stuck a strobe underneath behind the tree and like had that aim behind me while mixing it with the sunset dipping to kind of add these like magical touches to it. Um, and I was like, I got really excited about these like just like pops of light that I could just like throw in that maybe felt natural, but also had a little bit of like artificial texture to it. Um, but the home became this place that I really was like fascinated by, and how we create home, how we organize all the objects in it. So a lot of these here that I'm showing you right now are kind of sketches of the ways I was like thinking about like mythology, storytelling, um, objects in the house. Um, this is my grandmother, and this is my childhood blankets. Is actually something she brought from Guatemala and used to like wrap me in and carry me in when I was younger. But I would like again direct her, pulled her out, and was like, "Let's you stand out here and like do this." And they were all just for me to like practice. And it actually came from a workshop I was doing through Silver Eye Project, and it was like the class was called World Building. I was like, I needed something else outside of my like 9 to 5 job to do, and I was like, how do I world build? And so I took this online course during the pandemic, and it really got my mind going. And so a combination of that and like the work that I was just like casually doing, I brought all that into going into grad school. And then this is some of that work that I started doing in grad school. Um, this was like a collage piece I did with parakeets. Speaking of birds, this is our pet parakeet, and I photographed him in our house, and then I like printed out the pictures on transparency sheets and like cut them out, and then used magnets, and I like magnetized it to this photograph. Thinking a lot about like migration or like flight or fight modes. Like this parakeet really can't survive in this like weather condition. So thinking about like displacement. Yeah. And I also really wanted to get more tactile with my images. And so like just the way I was like cutting out the parakeets, I wanted to cut up my own photographs as well. And so this is like a photograph of that's printed out twice. One gets shredded, the other I cut into and then weave this mask, which is like the clothing. Oops, the clothing that then created this like mask over it, and then I kind of made that like object, and then set up the still life, lit it, and rephotographed it. So these like layers of photographing, building something, and then placing it to then rephotograph was really fascinating to me. Different ways I was printing as well to experiment on like textures on these like paper doilies that you get at like dollar stores. Been thinking about like placemats on the dining room table. I'm not gonna play this whole video actually, but this was a performance piece I did thinking about migration and like assimilation in homes. And this paper that I used was a suede wallpaper that didn't actually absorb inkjet ink. And so the ink sat on the paper itself and beat it up. And so I had 2 days before it could like fully dry where I can manipulate it. And so I did this performance piece to it, thinking a lot about the Quetzal bird, which is the Guatemalan state bird, and Catholicism. So this is like this symbol, this motif I made is the Quetzal perched on a holly stem. And so thinking about like Catholicism and like Mayan indigenous cultures kind of like fusing together. The Quetzal bird is also an endangered bird. And it also has a lot of ties to mythology in Mayan stories. So thinking about like that in relation to home, thinking about like cultural assimilation, this being erased from the home, losing one's sense of like culture, and that trying to be blended in was kind of like the point of this performance piece. But then it also became like this background, uh, the documentation of it itself became images that I could use later on, and you'll see that. But using that same paper, I was allowed to continue thinking about like actually like touching the photographs. And so I went through my family's like photo albums and our own images and thinking about like love and loss and made this series of images where I actually like printed the images on this paper and then again within that time frame before the ink fully dried in and set into the paper manipulated them with singular small gestures, either just with my fingerprints or like the like edge of my hand to create these like abstractions to like kind of remove figures from the space. But also by like erasing kind of or like really kind of focusing on the face, I think it also allowed an audience member to kind of impose their own stories on it and allow them to create their own narratives, even though maybe some of these images were like happy moments. So I was also thinking about how in like with photography, we're always trying to capture the happy moments, the like successes, the celebratory things, but we never are like trying to capture the like the pain that lingers throughout it or in between those, the shadows that linger. So I think through that gesture, I was trying to get that feeling across. This like blend of like aggressiveness with these like happy moments and like where that tension kind of lies. But to kind of go back into like my childhood portraiture and also like thinking about family blankets, I started doing a lot of like self-portraiture. And the weaving techniques where I was like weaving into the photographs again. And this time I was using my family blankets as like threads of weaving. So I was photographing my family blankets, printing them out, shredding them, and then using that as like thread and like cutting into the pictures of myself and like weaving them physically in either to create masks or to create like these shields. So all the components that are like lingering out are going over, and even the peacock all come from blankets that have been passed down to me or have that been like scattered across our home. And this way of working, these like tools, the blanket, the textiles, portraiture, all became the big components of what will be, well, I'll show you guys in a bit, my thesis project. But I was also really interested in like backgrounds and I was like making all these like weavings. And so I started making wallpapers as well. So my photographs could sit against and thinking a lot about, animations, cartoons, specifically Digimon, in this piece. I was thinking about like how like the glitches that happen, um, the wallpaper here again is like rewoven patterns from the childhood blanket. So thinking about how cultural traditions shift across like when migration happens and how those like get changed and they're not always the same. Like those traditions change and move around, and so the blanket patterns kind of are this like queer gesture for me that resemble that, where they're not fixed and we can unfix it and make it something new. But they can become these new like architectural elements within my practice because then they become walls and background surfaces and really emphasize like color and pattern. So again, this is a similar thing that I was doing with that green piece that I showed earlier, but these are all of my baby portraits. So this piece is called Performance for Cameras Baby, and thinking about how we all perform like gender or identity for cameras and like through outfits, through clothing, like we're constantly putting on this like mask of who we are. Or our parents are dressing us and like trying to be like, this is them, this is who they are. I'm wearing this like baseball like outfit. I played baseball for like 3 years. I wasn't even like a baseball player like that. But they're just like funny like moments in how we perform for the camera. And so I did a second rendition because these were all just me. These four were just me. And I decided to do a larger call to like the larger queer community and have them send me their own baby photos with this similar concept in mind of how we perform gender for the camera and using that same shredding and weaving technique, built these masks over each of the individuals.
I don't want to take too much time here, but I love the like opening to the community and like inviting people to like get involved with the concept and your process. How did it feel? Because you're like cutting up your own images, and there's a certain sort of like, I'm okay with this is me. I'm using myself as material, and obviously these people like gave you consent. That's not really what I'm talking about. But like, how did it feel to like work with images of others versus yourself? I guess is what I wanted to.
Yeah, it was actually really strange at first because I was like, it's kind of it feels like a violent thing. I'm like taking an X-Acto knife and I'm like cutting into these like metaphorically the faces of these like children, and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
this feels like if someone walked into the studio right now, they'd be like, this guy's a little cuckoo, something going on, and I'm like, but then after a while, I'm like, oh no, that it kind of became meditative because I was then cutting up the other ones and then being able to like weave, and I was finding different strategies based off of like the shapes of their hair, the head, their clothing, the picture they sent me, because the ones for me they were had a very similar type of like look, where some of the people's images were scaled differently and they had different hair, different like outfits. So I had to allow things to show through. Like in this one, I couldn't get that much clothing so that I could get this. So there's sometimes skin showing still, or like the backdrop of the photograph. So I had to like compromise a bit and be okay with that. So I learned a lot because I was able to like change up what I had built as like a formula. Um, but the actual
nice.
act
Yeah.
was a little weird.
Thank you.
Wallpapers continue throughout my practice in different ways where I've installed my work. This is when I was a resident at Oxbow School of Art in Michigan. But you can see here where the Quetzal performance piece kind of comes back in as like an image, even though it was like a documentation to something else. I revisited it and was like, oh, this actually can stand in for this idea of like flight or fight mode in this installation, and how old images that I didn't even make in school or during that time could also then be anchored in when I'm thinking about home and domestic space. I started experimenting with cyanotype when I was at this residency, which I was like, I haven't done this since I was an undergrad. And I was like, oh, that was fun. But I've never done it on glass and never done it on fabric. And so I was like, it really unlocked something for me in my own way of making. This is when we're going to get into more of my like thesis project for grad school. So going back into like self-portraiture, um, I was thinking a lot about illusions and how do I create like the body without having the body present. And then the backdrops and installation, like how do I allow something to be without it having to always exist in a frame? I was trying to like break from the idea of like a picture frame itself and using the actual tools of like the photographic studio, the C stand, the spring clamps, the backdrops we hang up to like have these like setups. But also I wanted to like embed that as part of the installation of displaying. So here, do I have the no? So basically, like I started off by trying to like I'd photograph myself. So the silhouette you see here was originally like a self-portrait. And then I printed that image out and I physically cut my body out of the image. And then I pinned it up on the C stand against the same backdrop of the blanket, but this time the back of the blanket. So like the thread colors change. And using artificial light and strobes, lit it so that it created this deep shadow, to really give it this idea of like body, of like someone being there, and then hanging. It's hard to see a little bit in this, but a headphones through it to kind of give the idea of like the presence of a shoulder in it. And that's me pushing up against this like specific corner because of the way since I cut the image, it like flopped inward and so glares were happening. So sometimes I had to push in on things so it would reduce the amount of glare, which some of these tools here are doing. It's like helping eliminate some of the glare happening in this. But this like rephotographing and layering to like then smush and like allow the silhouette to stand up on its own and allow patterns to clash against each other became really, really fascinating to me. And so with that like space and that like technique of working, I built this body of work where I started also using where I was subverting the history of portraiture and through self-portraitures as well, and thinking about identity and how these like the blankets and the textures of like home kind of helped like imprint on me, or how vice versa, like I imprinted on these blankets themselves. And so I'm using also mirrors within this work, which is what I'm holding in this. And so the mirrors end up reflecting blankets that are draped behind the camera's view. Um, so everything you see within like these compositions, there's no digital manipulation whatsoever. They're all, I call them like analog collages that all get done and built for the camera. There are a lot of like printing, cutting out, hanging, lighting, and then like hanging blankets behind the camera, even though you don't see them within the composition. I try to then capture the reflections of that through the mirrors to then add, to emphasize the silhouette in certain ways. And then also allow my body to peek through and add other like confusing elements to all of it. So this was the body of work that ended up being my thesis show called ¿Qué dice tu corazón? Which means, what does your heart say? And it's something my grandma said one time when she answered the phone. And I was like, why did you? She just answered the phone saying, ¿Qué dice tu corazón? I was like, what does your heart say? And I was like, oh, that felt like such a beautiful and genuine way to answer the phone, is like, what is your own like natural desire? Like follow that heart. What is your intuition? And there's always like a lot that like knowledge always exists in the brain, but I also believe that it really exists in like the body and in pattern and like gestures. And so this kind of body of work was thinking about listening to like my own heart, and also the way that maybe my body fell into like certain positions or gestures as a child, and how that existed within images and photographs as well within my family. So you'll see how that it continues with some of my archival images here. It was like an image of like me, like my like waist like dipped, my hand like kind of like pointed on my hip, kind of in this like queer boy gesture mode. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. I love that like gesture. And I bet it was also like very celebratory. And so like putting these back up, printing them large, cutting them out, and like allowing pattern to fill in these silhouettes. And then building them in my grandma's home became a new way of working versus outside, versus in my studio only. I could do them in the home and also like recreate the home. I could like together, my grandma and I could build a new home using all these patterns and all these blankets. So this one's called Peekaboo. Grandma coming out of the kitchen, peeking out, seeing if it was okay for her to cross the path. But also really just emphasizing the domestic space a lot, and bringing again these like tools that required like stiffness and straightness to like hold the photograph in place, and having that contrast within the actual home.
This is so timely. Is that a little Happy Mother's Day sign at the bottom in the plant?
You caught it. I didn't even notice that when I photographed it, until I was like printing it out large. I was like, oh my gosh, that says Happy Mother's Day. And she still has it. That was like from like 3 years ago, I think, at this point. And the photograph was taken in 2024, but she had that from the year before. She was a collector. And so I thought that was so great. Her and I together hold these mirrors also in these places to reflect again the blankets that I drape either like on the tripod or like on the walls behind the camera. And my goal is to never show the camera in these mirror reflections. Just thinking a lot about like the history of photography. But yeah, here's a detail shot of that, of the mirror itself, kind of being held by my grandma's hand and clash and allowing and you can actually kind of see my camera strap right here, little Canon camera strap. Um, but this is kind of the way these setups would happen. So like this would be the setup that I would photograph, wallpaper her house, and then these are the ways like the blanket would get draped behind the camera, behind my lights, so that I could capture this texture within the mirror. But thinking a lot about portraiture, like and specifically with photography, photography was used to like capture and like catalog and kind of classify different communities when like photography was like kind of booming. And so there was a lot of history of like the way like the size of someone's like head, the shape of someone's eyes, and like the race and how that like fit in, and they try to like categorize all this. So this way of working with silhouettes got to eliminate all those like details and allowed the silhouette to stand on its own, and just the shape of the body kind of just like show like be visible but without having to be fully visible on someone else's terms. Like they could just like stand and be present. And so I was thinking a lot about like the bodily gestures of my childhood, and also like more like masculine, rigid gestures that maybe I like purposely would stand in as an adult uh, to like perform a certain type of like idea of like masculinity. So it was a lot of like thinking of that um, throughout the work. But the wallpapers, as I had shown you all before, the wallpapers were like installation methods, and then I brought them back into like the ways that I was like actually photographing, where I was like, then, oh, I can like really like build these sets out and not just have like flat planes. Like I can add more depth into the scenery and into the set by actually wallpapering the whole home and like adding that texture and like making it feel more lived in, and thinking about also like who gets to create home, who like is it just the matriarch, or is it like also like the men in the home, like, or is it together we like do that. And I these was like a collaborative effort between my grandma and I, where I left some of the things that she had in place, but also I then moved things and layered things and rearranged her plants. This is my mom and I, same thing, same strategies. This is probably the one image that like shows more of like our faces and more of our bodies like full on than the others. Um, yeah.
We could probably spend an entire semester talking about this, but I'm curious how you feel working with your mom versus your grandma.
Um, wow, big question. I think my grandma's a little more she just kind of was like more like not necessarily mindless, but she just was like allow me to like kind of do whatever, and she's like down for it. Where I think my mom has someone who was around more of like the camera and like the image, like what the image is of themselves. And so being more like cautious of that, of like how they're represented was really interesting way of working, where my grandma was just like, I think more playful into it
I
and just
see.
was like, let's have fun. Let's like do this. She was like,
Yeah.
just tell me what to do. Um, and maybe it's an age thing as well, but I think like having grown up with my mom grown up like around like the digital camera and all that, like
Right.
the power of Photoshop and all these things, like and I think also the home specifically really added more to that, because working with my mom's home versus my grandma's home, it was like we have my mom's home, we have more there's more of us in the house. It's like I'm one of four brothers, and so there's so many people trying to use all these different spaces. Where at my grandma's house, it's just her, and
Got
so
it.
she's like, we can fully turn this into a set and do this all day. Where I have like very limited time frame in my parents' house.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Um, this piece is called "Dancing in the Commons." I was thinking this is basically I danced in my studio, built a little stage and a set, and danced in my studio for an hour, and had my camera on a remote timer, photographing myself. And I picked three images I really enjoyed, and did my same strategies of printing, cutting out, and re-putting them up. But I was thinking a lot about during colonization when the Spaniards came to Guatemala, they saw the indigenous communities dancing and they considered that devil worshipping, and so they banned it. But I think about dancing as this like liberatory practice and allowing the body to express itself. I think body language is one of the most like honest forms of language because your body is kind of like reacting to something versus I think verbal language you can sometimes filter and think before you like speak, where sometimes the body just kind of like has like that jerk reaction. And also dancing allows like other bodies to come together and like be with amongst others. So this piece, this triptych, all those kind of thoughts were going into that. And also just trying to have more fun with my practice. So I was like in the beginning trying to think too like political or trying to get like think about like how's my work like moving like all these conversations. But I was like sometimes I just need to like have fun and I'm always dancing in my studio and how can I use my body to stand in for something else? I also really wanted to be a magician growing up. So, like ideas of like sleight of hand tricks, I think became something like as an adult, as I've been thinking more in my like practice, like a lot of photography is all sleight of hand. It's like using mirrors to trick the eye to like create these like senses of like illusions of space. And so working in these ways with mirrors and turning the mirror back on itself, like our cameras are built with mirrors. Um, that like felt a way to be a magician again. Um, I really enjoyed that. I also within my compositions, you'll see I layer back in portraiture, but like here my family's portraits. So that's like me, that's my other brother, and just like building those into it, even though they're just like sneakily put in. And then also like the Quetzal bird comes in different motifs or different ways, like that are stitched on, even on the blankets back here. And this one was a challenge that my grad teachers did for me. She was like, "You photograph a lot of portraits in this vertical way. What about the horizontal portrait?" And I was like, "Ah, you're really smart. The horizontal portrait is a good way to think about it." So she made me go back home and like, how do I like create the horizontal portrait? And so this is what came up of it. And it actually is one of my like favorite images that I made in the series. Um, yeah. I also really enjoy um, kind of adding in like Easter eggs to my images. So like the wallpaper you see that I made back here actually comes from this textile that's like laying on the table here. You can see. So like me photographing these blankets, cutting them up into strips, reweaving them, and then like finding this like pattern that I do enjoy. But having that original source material in the photograph also felt really fun to me and also allows me to be like, I wonder if anyone's ever gonna notice. And some people do and some people don't. I like pointed out, they're like, oh my gosh, I see it now. But I like leaving like it's like leaving the answer like right in front of them. These were some outtakes that didn't make it into the show itself. Here, and I didn't capture actually. This was like an outtake where I didn't get the blanket to show because a lot of them is like having me to like is like a slide of it's like chance as I'm taking multiple images. But what was really interesting about this image to me was the mirror is aiming at this exact same corner of this space in the archival image. So the doorknob and like the lock, they line up with the old doorknob and lock from the photograph, but what's in the mirror is like the present doorknob and lock in that moment. And so I thought that was like a really fun way of like merging these times together, even though it didn't have nothing to do with like the textures of patterns. And then this one reflect myself a little bit into it while my grandma holds the mirror for me to like aim it for the sun. We were trying, that was our goal, was to try to get the sky or the sun. Um, just quickly go through some of my sculptural practice, but this is like all the collections of textiles that I've had used to work with throughout this body of work. And I made it into this big totem. And sorry, I don't know if you guys can see that, but yeah, this huge totem erupting from these black beans. Um, Cyanotype comes back in through these like drapes or to build these like forms. Um, Thinking about like a stork delivering a baby. Um, the peacock feather is also another symbol that comes throughout my practice, either as a feather or from like the blankets themselves. Um, Here I wood burned in the quetzal bird of one of the embroideries on this palette. And I was also became interested in balancing these like shipping palettes, thinking about how these textiles today may come to the United States from like other countries, other places around the world. Thinking about globalization of materials and also how like bodies come together to balance themselves and help each other out. And so adding movement, allowing the patterns to breathe and resemble water, were other new ways that towards the end of grad school allowed me to move a little outside of photographs directly and using methods of like light to imprint on objects. I'm just gonna kind of quickly go through this is other forms of balancing palettes I've done and kind of just like other residencies I've done since I graduated where I've got to think about like the tools that I use within my photographs, like the spring clamps and how those can become objects. And so I learned how to like aluminum cast, which then like became objects for then installations, which then I like for this last residency was I like finally cleaned them up and polished them and then they became almost like new frames, but thinking about the tool itself again, and thinking about balancing. And then this was like one of the last iterations that I've done of how I've installed this work, past my thesis show and past just using like peel and stick wallpaper. I printed them back on fabric, the patterns, and allow that to like be malleable and drape and have these moments come into the to play and interact with the actual images themselves and bringing the clamps back into the installations. And again, the heart is just really important to me. And so finding these kind of like tools that have that echo that feel really magical. That's all I have for you all. Thank you so much. And I will stop sharing my scrutiny.
Gee, sorry to rush you there at the end.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, cool. I know we started a little bit late. Can we keep you for like another 5 minutes?
Of course, of course.
Cool. All right. Leo, Sarah, you're here live with us. So any questions for Dominic? I have a couple, but I can wait. Well, I'll jump in. You talked about this class that you took, the online class that helped you consider world building. How does that like logistically manifest? I'm not even sure, like maybe I should take the class. How, like, when you're looking at something, do you kind of like check in with like, hey, remember your world building class? Like, how do you decide like when that needs to be added? Man, that's like barely a question. How do you like look at something, you're like, it's not a world yet?
Yeah, I mean, that was, let's see. I don't know, I think it was like something for me was just like, what are the things that are like changing what it is that you're like photographing or like for example, that like tree image with like the snow dripping on, like I was like, okay, if there was no flash into it, it would have just kind of felt maybe a little flat. But there was something about like the weight of all the snow and this like illumination from behind that felt like portal-esque. It felt like there was something like otherworldly happening that didn't feel quite here. And so I think for me, it's like that tension of like, there's something not quite of a reality, or like no one would actually like have their house built this way where like all this like wallpaper is like thing, all these like blankets are being draped, all these like C-stands are, being put into the homes, like all that started like emphasizing when something became world building. But also I feel like world building is such like a huge vague term. So I think it just depends on the kind of world or spaces that you're like interested in making.
We have, let's see, Leo wrote something in the chat, but I don't think it's a question, just like a comment. Can you see that, Dominic?
Yes, I
Oh,
can.
okay, cool. Yeah, actually, I do really like that, how you as an adult now have like a very different agency than you as a child, but also like a different agency on like how to like utilize those images. I think that's, yeah, it's really interesting. Like when we're kids, like our parents make all the decisions, but like you're kind of like reclaiming a little bit of that by like utilizing those
Yeah.
images.
Yeah. Yeah, I just was like really like fascinated by seeing some of like those like postures. I was like, oh, there's just some like really queer gestures in there. And maybe like back then, like no one really like saw that or just was like thinking about that. But to me as an adult and now like in my own like identity being like, oh, I see it and I can like really relate and I like see younger me in that so much more directly. And it's like then fun again to like celebrate it in this new way.
You're, I don't know, well, whatever. You've done like enough in your life that you probably have a good answer for this. And it does tie back into like the world building. I love like your current work so much, and like the layers and textures and like all this stuff is like really incredible. Do you ever feel kind of trapped within your own world that you built, or do you sort of have like unlimited freedom and you're like, no, like all this can go away and I can pursue this? And I kind of see that with the sculpture work anyways. But yeah, how does that feel,
Mhm.
like your own, living in your own world? Like, is it caging you in yet, or?
A little, I think. I mean, like at times it does because it's like I think I go back and forth with, am I just like following this now, this like formula of working? And how long is that going to be like exciting, or is it just going to be like rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat? And I'm going through like this thing where I'm like, okay, maybe it's just like I just need to expand outwardly, kind of like the way I did like the performance for Camera's Baby piece, where it's like, all right, how do I bring others into this, and how do we create collaborative portraits together? Um, there's the photographer Paul Sapuya. I don't know, he does a lot of like mirror work, like self mirror work, and he's kind of followed the same strategy, and he's been doing it for a while, and I think there's something. I still find his work really great, and so I'm like, okay, maybe it's not that it's like I'm bored of it or I'm trapped, but I just need to find other ways to bring others into it. And so I'm actually going to be going to Houston in a couple weeks for residency for 3 months, and I want to actually work with like other community members, specifically of the, like the Latinx like diaspora, and have them bring me their own like childhood blankets or their blankets that they brought from like their own like family's migration, and like share those stories with me. And then maybe I could like build wallpapers for them and like go to their homes, and like together we photograph a version of their own portrait that feels in the same kind of language or formula.
Oh man,
Um,
that sounds so awesome. Like, yeah, like taking your practice into someone else's home is, yeah, that's wild.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or I was thinking about doing it with construction workers, like going back to construction and being like,
Man,
what if I
yeah.
do it with like workers on construction sites and like meet them, have meet them bring me their blankets, and yeah.
Oh, epic. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, we'll have to have you back on. Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to say I really enjoyed your Delhi photo series as well as the construction one. And you mentioned that both of those were, I believe the Delhi one was on film and the construction one might have been as well. So I just wanted to ask, especially when I really enjoyed the progression towards kind of seeing the matriarch of the family in represented in these cutout portraits. Do you have any plans or inspiration for your next collection and what kind of medium you might want to work with next?
Yeah. So like there was a combination of like photo of like film and like digital work from those series. But I'm actually excited to. I've learned how to basket weave recently. I'm actually working on one right
Oh,
now. So I've been basket weaving, but also thinking about cyanotype and these like patterns. I've been cyanotyping on fabric, cutting up the fabric and using the fabric as weavers to build like objects. And so in Houston, they have one of the largest Mayan textile collections at their Manil collection. It's like this museum out down there. And so I want to like work with their archives to interpret those patterns from that collection and make vessels and make objects that then be used as props for my images in these like sets. So slowly like piecing things here and there. There's like I get like interested in different things. I think they end up like finding a way to come back into the photographic image or the composition.
yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Did not see basket weaving coming. I was like, oh yeah, is it going to be film or digital? And then boom, baskets.
Right. Baskets. Here we go. I know it was. I learned it at this. Someone taught me at the residency was at last in Provincetown, and I was like, this is actually such a nice. I mean, I'm thinking like textiles are. It's all weaving, and so I was like, it actually feels really nice to like do it and like weave and like instead of weaving within images, like how do I, yeah, weave physically and then make objects or weave around things like. I'm trying to incorporate more like metal things into the weaving. So like maybe I'll make C stands that have like baskets around, I don't know.
Wow. Well, yes. Very excited to have you come back. Cool. Well, thank you, Sarah and Leo, for hanging out with us live. It's awesome to have you here. And yeah, Dominic, thank you again so much. Thanks for going just a bit over for us. Yeah, really appreciate you being here.
Of course, thank you so much for having me and thank you all for listening and asking questions and enjoying the work.
Can you real quick put your Instagram and website back up? I guess it's linked within our class too, but can you
Yeah,
throw
no,
that
let
back
me
up?
just put it back up for y'all. Yeah, it's
Nice.
Domo23 is my Instagram and then DominiqueMunoz.com.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you very much. And Leo and Sarah, thank you again. And have a great rest of your evening, all three of you.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.